This video is going to be in short form on YouTube. You will see all of it in the nitty gritty behind the scenes of the lawsuit and what it entails and what Jonathon is going to be arguing and all that stuff if you go to one of my other platforms, and the links are in the description. And the reason you're not going to see all that on YouTube and you're only going to get a very minimal portion of this overgeneralized description of the lawsuit on YouTube is because I'm currently suspended from YouTube. If you're watching this on my other platforms, you're going to see this video right away because I can upload there. Right now, I'm locked out of my channel on YouTube. So if you're watching this video on YouTube, it's probably a week after we did this interview. Just another reminder to go to my other platform so you can see the stuff that I'm doing as it's actually happening and not wait until I'm let out of YouTube jail. But I'm reformatting how I do this again because this is now my second suspension. And I will say it was related to a video interviewing a medical ethics director, okay, a guy who is a director of medical ethics at a major institution who is suing over vaccine mandates. And apparently he's not allowed to challenge medical ethics, even though he directs the Center for Medical Ethics. That's where we're at. So, Jonathon, let's talk about this case briefly for the YouTube audience. We're going to go into detail for everybody else. I'm pulling up your website here so everybody can go read it for themselves if they want to, right? Lubinlegal.com. But let's talk about big picture. What this group of firefighters is pushing back on.
Sure. So it's a group of 6. They're firefighters, but they also provide EMS and that type of services, so ambulatory services. They work at ambulances in the city of Naperville, which, like you said, is just outside of Chicago. And so that means that they've been on the front lines fighting COVID right from the beginning. And they've been, before we knew anything about COVID-19, before we knew how transmissible it was, before we knew how deadly it was, before we knew who was most susceptible to getting it, they were running into not the antiseptic environment of a hospital, but they were treating patients out on the scene, providing ambulance services, and of course, ambulance are their pre-confined quarters right from the beginning. So I think of them as heroes. I don't know whether they like that title, but I think of them as heroes in the fight against COVID. And now they're being told by, and I'll tell you who the players are, but basically by the governor of the state, that they either have to get the COVID vaccine or they have to submit to weekly testing for COVID-19. And stop me when this gets boring, but one of the things that they've emphasized to me is that they were never forced to get tested, weekly testing, at any point in the last year and a half. It's only now that the vaccine mandates are coming down that's being offered as an alternative to get weekly testing for COVID. But I think the narrative is like, well, it's not a big deal because you could just do weekly testing, as if that's what we've always been doing. But they haven't always been doing that. And we've had tests for the last, almost for the last year and a half. And they've been going into people's homes for the last year and a half, saving lives for the last year and a half. And I suppose, if accepting the narrative, subjecting people to the possibility of catching COVID from them for the last year and a half without doing this weekly testing. So the weekly testing seems to be really punitive more than anything else. It's part of the drive, and you've talked about it in some of the other videos, to get people vaccinated no matter what. And so there's 2 parts of the lawsuit. The complaint has 3 counts, but broadly speaking, there's 2 parts of the lawsuit. There is the substantive aspect of it, where we argue, amongst other things, that the government doesn't have the right to force you to take this vaccine. And I'm sure we'll talk at some point in the next little bit about Jacobson and some of the decisions from the Supreme Court about vaccines and all of that. But the first part is that the government doesn't have the right to force you to take this vaccine on penalty of losing your job. That it shouldn't distinguish between those who are immune from COVID for as a result of natural immunity and those who are being forced to take the vaccine in the way they're doing. It's an equal protection count. And then the other thing, though, which in a way is, I don't know, it's more important, less important, but it certainly is, I think, as clear as day. The governor of this state doesn't have the power to do this. So in the beginning of all the lockdowns, the governor relied on, and every state has something like this, but in the case of Illinois, it's the Illinois Emergency Management Act. And it gives the governor the power to declare a state of emergency for 30 days and it gives him enumerated powers within that 30-day period to address the emergency. Now, the earliest lawsuits about this had to do with, can you extend the 30 days by just declaring another state of emergency? And look, personally, in my opinion, if you look at the statute, I don't think that was intended. But that's fine when the judge says the monkey's blue, and it doesn't matter what your lying eyes tell you. And so, courts have found that the governor has the power to extend the state of emergency by finding new facts, or by finding essentially the same facts. And that gives the courts the ability to say, no, those facts aren't correct, and the state of emergency shouldn't be extended. And so that's become, non-controversial. There was a question about whether he could lock down the entire state. There's nothing that says he could do that, but all right, fine. They were able to point to, there's one of the enumerated powers is to regulate ingress and egress within the disaster area. So if you decide that the entire state is a disaster area, and ingress and egress means go to your job or not, so at least there's some kind of hook that says that he could do that. There is nothing in this statute, not one thing in this statute, that arguably says he can force someone to get a vaccine. He could force someone to fire an employee for not getting a vaccine, anything like that. So I'll stop now to let you ask some questions, but that's broadly speaking what this is about.
Well, I'm curious, did they have the option of filing an exemption?
So what they've been told in their case is that if they don't want to get the vaccine, they can go in for weekly testing. And so that's what they've been told. And so that's the exemption. In other words, in their case, at least so far, they don't have to say, well, I have a medical exemption or religious exemption. They could just say, no, I'll just do the weekly testing. Their position is, why should we be singled out just for not? And by the way, I want to make one point that's important to my clients, which is they're not anti-vax. In the case of some of the folks here, have the 6, and there are others that are supporting them, have gotten the vaccine, and they just don't want to report it to their employer. They don't think they should have to report their private health decisions to their employer. In some cases, they haven't got it, and they don't want to report that to their employer either. But the point that they're making is that this isn't something that their employer, which is a municipality, should have the ability to regulate.
I've heard that from many people, and I'm curious, and I think we can get away with talking about this on YouTube. I'm curious what you think as you've been handling this case or heard about other cases, if clients or employees, people who are filing these suits or maybe potentially down the road would be involved in litigation over this, if they have less or more ability to fight back if they follow all the administrative rules and then sue, or like say, I mean, I guess in this case maybe it's different because it's not an exemption, it's a weekly testing, but like say you're someone who says, okay, I do have this exemption, but I also feel the same way your clients do. Some of your clients do. I don't want to file an exemption because I feel like it's just none of their business anyway. I'm not going to say. I want to be able to, and that's not an option. I'm curious what you think about the rights that people actually have, and maybe it's a state by state thing, so it's different depending on the case. But yeah, to go to that specific argument of I don't feel like I should have to give my private medical information in this case to my employer. Does that put you at less or more footing if you do want to take legal action than someone who says, I'm going to go through the process, I'll file my exemption, I'll do what they say, and then that way, if I end up in court someday, I say, hey, I did everything I could, but I just refuse to get this, or I refuse to say, or I refuse to get, I'm just curious on if that, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And one thing that I'm finding as I speak to people, this is one group I've spoken to, but I've spoken to plenty of other people about this issue. It really is case by case. It's hard to answer. It's a phenomenal question. It's just hard to answer standing on one foot. And something that I've spoken with many clients over the years. I've been in the area of employment law, amongst other things, for most of my career. And employment law in general is not proactive, it's reactive. And so in many, many cases, not every case, but in many, many cases, your employer will terminate you and then we can do something. But you can't prevent the employer from terminating. This is one area, and it's for a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons is because it's a public employer as opposed to a private employer. So there are certain rights that come with being an employee of the government. that you don't have as an employee in a private company.
Right.
So that's one thing. But in general in employment law, your best bet is obviously to well, it really is case by case. I don't want to speak out of turn that anyone listens to my advice and goes and does something stupid.
Yeah.
But in general, it obviously, when a client comes to me and the record is clear already, they did everything they were supposed to, and still the bad thing happened. That makes my job a heck of a lot easier. That's for sure. And just for anyone out there who's thinking of calling an attorney, the worst thing for us when a client calls us is, well, I quit, and now what can I do? That call an attorney first before you do that. That makes the world a lot more difficult once you've already abandoned the position.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. All right. So let's go back to this case. So that I really appreciate that you made that distinction about how it's not just we don't want to get the vaccine, though that is some of the people, but it's people who feel like this is a privacy issue. Because I do think the concerns over these mandates are often oversimplified inaccurately by the government, by mainstream media, to just be like, it's all these kinds of people. Even when it comes to the people who are concerned about the vaccine, it's like they're all this type, and it's very inaccurate and divisive, I think, and continues to push that narrative that we've discussed. So the last little bit for YouTube, which I think is safe enough, is big picture. What do they hope comes from this? Is this for just them? Do they see this as like a fight for other people that are government employees in that area? Why did they bother doing this? Because going up against the government is never an easy thing.
They were very specific that they are fighting this fight on behalf of themselves and on behalf of everybody who's employed by the city of Naperville, and particularly people in their position providing EMS services through the fire department. But they're in this on behalf of themselves and on behalf of everybody, particularly in Naperville, but in the state of Illinois, who's in this position of being forced by the governor and through the governor by their employer to either get a vaccine, declare their status, or go through weekly testing improperly in violation of their privacy and their bodily autonomy.
You can support my work by checking out my sponsors. There are two options, both an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic way you can toast to free speech wherever it still exists. The first is AllisonWinePromo.com, Allison with 1L winepromo.com. You can get 50% off of some of my favorite Argentinian Malbecs and 50% off shipping. They have switched out the bottles from the last three. So if you got the last three, these are brand new, one from the oldest vineyard in Argentina. They use no filtering, no flavoring, no dyes, and no excess chemicals. So again, AllisonWinePromo.com. But if you're waking up and you got to fight back against big tech censorship and you want a strong cup of coffee to do that, check out TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison, TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison. These are Nicaraguan roasts. They've got a wide variety of them. They're shade grown, high altitude, and USDA certified organic. They also have a tea that you can make out of the coffee fruit. So don't forget, check out my sponsors, support my work while I'm in YouTube timeout, and continue on with this video.